798, Parsha Shalach. Okay. So this is the episode. This is the episode of the spies. Everybody have Chumashim? 798. V'daber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Shlach lecha anoshim. Send men. V'yasuru es eretz Canaan, and they shall check out the land of Canaan. You're right in front of the camera. V'yasuru es eretz Canaan, asher ani nosen livnei Yisrael, which I am giving to the Jewish people. Ish echad lemate avosav tishlachu. One man per tribe, kol nasi vahem. Each one should be prominent. So you have over here the idea Moshe Rabbeinu is sending. Now we only find out later in Parshas Dvarim. Keep the place for a second and turn to the book of Dvarim, first chapter, Pasuk 22. You have to know these things, these go together. So look at the book, keep your finger on the place here, and go to page 944. And this will give us a background of what's really happening over here. On page 944, can I ask everybody, put away all the technology. There should be no technological equipment being used during the shir. If you are, so please use it somewhere else. It is disrespectful for the Torah to be looking at a smartphone. You know, if you don't want to be here in the shir, you don't have to be, but do not look at put away all the technology. So on page 944, if you look at Pasuk 22, it's 4 lines from the top. Moshe Rabbeinu in the book of Devarim is reviewing the history, he's going back. And in the 4th line he says, Vatikravun elai kulchem, you all approached me. Vatomru nishlacha anoshim lefanenu, let us send men ahead of us. V'yachberu lanu esa aretz, they shall check out the land. V'yashivu osanu davar es haderech asher nalaba, they will tell us how to go in. V'esa orim asher navo aleim. So you see that the history was that the Jewish people approached Moshe Rabbeinu with this idea. It wasn't his idea, it was their idea. And that's why now back to where we are over here. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe shlach lecha anoshim. Send them if you want to. I mean, I don't think they're not necessary, but I know that the people want them. Now you decide if you should listen to the people or not. And Moshe Rabbeinu felt, well, you know, once somebody says, well, let's see the land. Trust me, it's good. You know, what are you hiding? So Moshe Rabbeinu is put kind of in a situation where he really has no choice. So he gives them an order. V'yasuru es eretz Canaan. Now, the article probably translated as spy out the land. But you see the word yasuru comes from the Hebrew word yitaron. Yitaron means a benefit. That means go to the land and tell us what's good about it. Go to the land. I'm not asking you. Now, what did they do in the end of the story? They came back and bring a negative report. And I'm jumping a little bit, but just to get a clarity on the entire picture here. What did they do wrong? At the end of the day, what did they do? You sent us, we came back, and we told you that, yeah, there are certain good things, but the people are powerful, we're going to get smashed. So what did they do wrong? And therefore we can't go into the land of Israel. That's where they crossed over. I wasn't sending you for if. I was sending you for how. That means if you're in the military, and the commanding officer sends you on a reconnaissance mission, and says, okay, Corporal, I want you to go up and tell us how we're going to take that hill. And then he comes back and says, sir, we can't take that hill. I didn't ask you for your opinion. I didn't ask you if we could take the hill. I said, how are we going to take the hill? Is it going to be a tank attack? Are we coming from the air? How are we going to do it? I didn't ask you if we're going to do it. That was the flaw. Nobody asked you for your opinion over here. And we certainly didn't ask you to come and discourage the entire Jewish people. Now, take a look at Rashi. The first Rashi says, Lama nismecha parshas beraglim leparshas Miriam. Last week if you remember, last week's Parsha ended with Miriam speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, why did the Torah put this whole episode of the Meraglim right near, is juxtaposed to the story of Miriam? Lefi shalaksa al iske diba. Miriam was punished because of Lashon Hara. Iske diba. Diba means she brought a negative report. She was saying, Shedibra be'achel. V'rishoim halalu ro v'lo lokchon musar. They saw and they did not take musar. They saw what Miriam had done and they did not internalize the message. Now, there's a big question here. What is it? What's the question? What's the question? Big question here, or an obvious question. Who did Miriam, what or whom did Miriam speak about? Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. And what were they talking about? About the land. It wasn't a human being. It wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember, Miriam was taken to task for speaking about the greatest man in history. Nobody matches up there. How could I possibly? Maybe the reason she got punished is because it was Moshe Rabbeinu. Maybe anybody else. It's not as severe. Number one. And number two, she was talking about human being. I'm talking about the land. You mean if I get into my car, and I say, boy, I'm trying to buy a car, and the guy shows me a car, I say, that's a lousy car. That's not good enough for you. Lashon Hara. No Lashon Hara about cars. So what's the problem over here? How can you compare a human being to the land? It's a good question, right? It's a good question. What's the answer? The answer is when guys ask me, there's in the religious world, in the frum world, guys, you get married with the shidduch system. There's a shidduch. You go and meet a girl for your shidduch. It doesn't have to be in the frum world. It means any girl you're contemplating marrying. So I always recommend there's one primary quality you should be looking for. No jokes. What's that?
Good cook.
Good cook. Yeah, no, that they'll learn. That's doable. That they'll learn, right? What should you be looking for? No jokes. What should you be looking for? No jokes. I'll make the jokes. What should you be looking for? One quality. She's careful to not speak Lashon Hara. She at least makes a kind. Listen, we all trip up once in a while. I remember, I think 13 years ago, I slipped up. But we all slip up once in a while. But she should be conscientiously focused on not trying, that it's something that she's not interested in doing. That's how people sleep up. Why? I'll tell you why. Somebody who is fighting the flaws, when you meet somebody, or you talk about somebody, you can focus on the positive and you can focus on the negative. Why are you focusing on the negative? If you're focusing on the negative, that means you're looking for the flaws. If you're looking for the flaws in other people, that means that there's something internal that you find the negative. You tend to find the negative. If you're looking for the flaws in other people, Tyler, can I trouble you to make it a little colder, the air conditioning? Thanks. Colder. Somebody tampered with it. What's it on? What was it on? 23. Yeah, somebody tampered with it. See, I know. Yeah, 21's great. Yeah. And the criminal will find out later. But the what do you call it? Somebody who's speaking Lashon Hara. I mean, you're looking for the negative. In other words, you're right. You can't compare Moshe Rabbeinu to the land of Israel, but you could look at what was done. She focused on something negative. Why did you guys go into the land and focus on something negative? You should have focused on the positive. Why are you focusing on the negative? Why are you even seeing the flaws? That's the lesson she should have learned. Why did you see the flaws? And so a person has to know, especially a woman creates the mood in the home. A wife creates the home. I told you, one of the Amoraim, he said, I never referred to my wife as my wife. I referred to her as my home. He didn't call her Ishti, he called her Basi, my home. Because she creates the mood. A girl, a female, a woman who is finding the flaws in people will find the flaws in life. And she'll find the flaws in you. Whereas if she's looking for the positive in people, she'll find the positive in life. Rabbi Akiva and his wife were so poor, the Gemara says, they were in a, they were in a barn. They were sleeping in a barn. Her father, she saw the positive in Rabbi Akiva. She's willing to go and marry this unemployed, he was a shepherd, so I guess that was employment, and he's a completely uneducated shepherd. Her father is one of the 3 richest men in Yerushalayim. That's a good shidduch. Her father is one of the 3 richest men in Yerushalayim. could have had the best guy in Lakewood as a son-in-law. And she comes home and says, Dad, I got some good news and some bad news. The good news is I'm engaged. The bad news is Akiva. What? And he excommunicates, he cuts her out of, he completely cuts her out of all his property. And they're so poor, they're in a barn, and the Gemara says they were lying on straw, and she's pulling straw out of Rabbi Akiva's hair. She's pulling the straw out. That's what they're, and all of a sudden, at the entrance of the barn, Navi comes, Eliana comes incognito, and he pretends to be a man. He says, listen, my wife just gave birth, and we don't even have straw for her to lie on. And so Rabbi Akiva turns to his wife and he says, wow, you see, there people are even worse off than us. That means they both had the ability to see the positive. She saw the positive in Rabbi Akiva. He saw the positive in their situation, and they're in an abysmal situation. And you know what the next line of the Gemara is? He says to her, hey, there people are worse off than us. She says to him, I want you to go off to yeshiva. That's what they got to do with the other. That's the next line in the Gemara. He says, wow, there are people worse off than us. And she says, go to yeshiva. What's the connection? What's the connection? A guy who can see the positive in that situation, he won't be bothered by the Spartan conditions in yeshiva either. That means she understands Rabbi Akiva has the potential to grow in Torah because he doesn't need the creature comforts of life. He won't be distracted by any of the various challenges you may find. I mean, what you got in yeshiva today is a five-star hotel compared to what they had in Europe. You know that in Europe they used to have something called Essen Tag. You know what that was? Essen Tag. When the Bachram when they went to a yeshiva in Europe, so then the yeshiva had one building where they learned. The rest of the time you had to find a place to sleep, and you had a weekly rotation of where you were assigned to eat your meals, which was usually poor people around the town who barely had enough for their family, and they weren't all that excited about having yeshiva guys over at the house. And sometimes you fell through the cracks, you didn't have a meal that day, and you had to find a bench in the women's section of a shul to sleep on at night. It was very, very Spartan. My Zadiel of Hashem, was in Slobodka, and when he came to America, he never wanted to go out for Shabbos. Say he only came to our house. He wouldn't eat by other people because he had such a negative experience, Essen Tag, eating daily at other people. He wasn't interested in doing that. So he came to us. All of that changed with Rabbi Meir Shapiro of Lublin. The famous Rabbi Meir Shapiro, the Daf Yomi, he changed that. It was his yeshiva, the Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin. He built the yeshiva. It was the first yeshiva that had a dormitory and a cafeteria in it. That was the first yeshiva. And that's why there were guys all over Europe who they were fighting to get into that yeshiva. And they had the entrance. They took 200 boys. The entrance exam was a test on 500 pages of Gemara. Yeah, 500 pages of Gemara that you had to know to get into that yeshiva. And then there was a condition you're only allowed to sleep 6 hours at night. That was among other conditions. And they're playing for keeps. So Rabbi Akiva had the ability to see the positive. He's not bothered by little things. His wife said, go learn in yeshiva. You won't be bothered by the Spartan conditions. And by the way, the Stipler, there was the Stipler had a chavrusa, a man named, I think it was Rabbi Yeshaya Horwitz. He was a chavrusa of the Stipler. So one day, he couldn't get to the Stipler. The Stipler lived in Bnei Brak. He couldn't make it to the chavrusa. He had a medical appointment. So he came in late to the Stipler, and he comes to the house, and it was a blistering hot day in Bnei Brak. The Stipler was wrapped in his tallis with his tefillin, and they did not put the fan on in the room. They normally had a fan. They didn't have air conditioning. He didn't have the fan on, and the Stipler was learning, and it was blistering hot. So Yeshaya Horwitz comes in, and he says, what's going on? How come you're all wrapped up with your tallis and the fan's not on? So Stipler said, listen, I was in Navardik. Navardik, it was freezing cold. You had to you either slept on a bench or on the floor. And my success in Torah was because I learned Torah under the most trying conditions. I never have that opportunity nowadays. I can't learn without a fan at your expense. We learn together. I have no right to turn off the fans when you're around. But now you weren't here, you were late. So I finally was able to have a nostalgic trip back down memory lane and put myself in a situation where I'm learning Torah in total discomfort. Me'ein olam haba. What a delight. Yeah. And that was what she saw in Rabbi Akiva. And that's why the flaw of the Meraglim was, hey, didn't you see what happened by Miriam? She was focused on the negative. Why are you focused on the negative? Okay. Then, in Pasuk Daled, it starts naming these. Vayishlach osam Moshe. Pasuk Gimel. Vayishlach osam Moshe me'midbar poran al pi Hashem. Kulam anoshim roshei b'nei Yisrael hema. And at this moment, before they left, they hadn't done anything right yet. Rashi says they were tzaddikim at that point. Ve'ela shmosam. These are their names. Lamate Ruvain Shabua ben Zakur. The head of the tribe, the representative from Reuven was a man named Shamua ben Zakur. Now, I told you many times, there's an expression, Leisa mili de lo ramiza be'oraisa. There's nothing that's not alluded to in the Torah itself. And sometimes it's completely out of context, completely out of the normal context. So there's an interesting Gemara. Rabbi Meir, remember, we're learning about Rabbi Meir now in Shir, right? Rabbi Meir had a wife named Bruria. And this Bruria was a very, she figures very prominently in Shas. Bruria comes up all the time. One time, Bruria saw a student, a Talmud was reviewing his learning, but he was reviewing quietly. So Bruria kicked him. And she quoted the pasuk that says that you have to learn Torah out loud. When you want to remember something, if you learn Torah and you verbalize the words, not loud enough to bother the guy next to you, by the way, but if you actually, when you're reviewing and you review it out loud, somehow it leaves more of an impression. It penetrates deeper. That's, by the way, one of the reasons why davening, what's the halacha by davening? How loud does your davening have to be? Loud enough that you hear your own words. You have to daven, it's not enough to think it. Why do you have to hear your own words? It makes it more active. It's more of an impression, even though it's a lav shein bo ma'isa, right? Even though it's not considered action, but it leaves an impression on you. And by the way, it should be loud enough, but not loud enough to bother the person next to you. You always got to remember the other people on the planet. But the same thing is when it comes to learning. So Bruria kicked him, and she said to him, "The Gemara in Eruvin." She kicked him. She said, "Hey, learn out loud. That's how you remember it." Where is that alluded to? And right in this name over here. Shamua. What does the word Shamua sound like? To hear. Shamua. If you hear it, ben Zakur. What does Zakur sound like? Zocher. To remember. If you want to remember your learning, you got to hear your learning. You got to say it out loud. Just alluded to in the words. Just a little allusion. Just a little entertainment. Then, skip down to the next one. Lemate Yehuda. Right at the end of that line. Kalev ben Yefuneh. Any comment about that name? Anybody want to say anything about that name? Kalev ben Yefuneh. Exactly. What's a kelev? A kelev's a dog. You know, I once noticed there is no sports team whose official name is the Dogs. So like, the Detroit Dogs. There's no college team, pro team. There was Bulldogs. Right? Yeah, Bulldogs already, that's already important. That's chashuv. Bulldogs, But there's no team called Dog. Dogs in general are considered, if you say something or somebody is a dog, is generally uncomplimentary. If you call somebody a serpent, oh, he's a real snake, right? That has a certain implication. You say he's a rat. Certain animals, you say he's a lion. Ooh, that's already, that's a little covet over there, right? Yeah, he's a llama, right? Probably, that means he's chilled. Llamas are pretty chilled creatures, But I don't know of any sports team called a dog. A dog is definitely a derogatory. Kalev is one of the good guys. It's Kalev and Yeshua. They're going to be the two heroes over here. Why is his name Kalev? And what does Yefuneh mean? Why is he called Kalev, a dog? The answer is the Gemara says a dog is a brazen animal. Right? And the dog, they'll bark at you, Even if they can't even back it up. it's one thing if it's a Doberman, then we have a lot of respect. Once in a while you see there's a poodle. Hey, buddy. Get out of here. My wife had a poodle when I got married. It was in their house. It wasn't by us. French poodle. A French poodle. His name was Pierre. Pierre the poodle. Me and him. Pierre, that was his name. He was a French poodle. Pierre. I didn't get along with him at all. He's always jumping on my lap when I'm trying to eat. Get out of here. Would you take it? She thought it was oh so cute. I'm just getting this off my chest now. It traumatized me. So why is he called Kalev? Kalev is a brazen animal. This is the man who's going to stand up against the Jewish people. This is the man who's going to take on the entire Jewish people, and that takes a certain amount of brazenness. You got to have a certain amount of guts to go out. A dog will, and sometimes a dog shows that brazenness. And Kalev, number one, represents the fact that he's got the spine. Later, when push comes to shove, he's going to shout down the entire Jewish people, number one. And number two, Yefuna comes from the Hebrew word lifanot, to turn away. And the Gemara says he turned away from the plot of the spies. That means they had a plot, and Kalev turned away from the plot. Okay, we'll see more about that in a second. In Pasuk, skip down, in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Lemate Yosef. Sorry, I skipped something. The next pasuk. Lemate Ephraim Hoshea bin Nun. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea bin Nun. This is what the beauty of Torah is. This is just names. And there's such a story lying underneath the surface of what, it's only a name. So what is he called? Lemate Ephraim, from the tribe of Ephraim. Hoshea bin Nun. Now, who is this Hoshea going to actually be? Yoshua. Okay. And you'll notice now, who was Ephraim's father? Yosef. He had two sons, Ephraim and Menashe. Here, it says, Lemate Ephraim, Hoshea bin Nun. Now, take a look at the very next line towards the end of the line. Lemate Yosef, Lemate Menashe, Gadi ben Susi. From the tribe of Yosef, the tribe of Menashe is Gadi ben Susi. Well, why when it introduces Ephraim, it doesn't say Lemate Yosef? Yet, when it introduces the guy, the man from the tribe of Menashe, it starts with Lemate Yosef, Lemate Menashe, Gadi ben Susi. You heard the question. What's the answer? Lemate Yosef, Lemate Menashe, Gadi ben Susi. Yet by Ephraim it doesn't say it. Why not? Anybody want to venture a guess?
Maybe it's not a tribe somehow?
No, it's a tribe. They're both tribes. They're on equal footing. They're both sons of Yosef. Yosef was divided into two tribes. As a matter of fact, there was the camp they were represented. Yosef doesn't have a tribe. It's Menashe, Ephraim, Binyamin. That was all one group. Remember, they were divided up into 4 units, the 4 camps. There's one of the camps is Binyamin, Ephraim, and Menashe. They're tribes, and they're listed as tribes. So why does it associate Yosef with Menashe? It doesn't associate it with the man from Ephraim. So several Mefarshim say, what did Yosef do regarding his brothers? Yosef brought a negative report about his brothers to Yaakov Avinu. Instead of looking for the positive, Yosef found the flaws. Between these two, from the tribe of Ephraim, it's going to be Hoshea. He's going to bring a positive report. He doesn't carry that negative aspect, that Yosef gene, or that tendency of finding the negative. He's not associated with Yosef. The guy from Menashe, Lemate Menashe, what's his name? Gadi ben Susi, he brings back a negative report. So he's got that Yosef tendency in him. So he's associated with Yosef. Therefore, it doesn't put him by Ephraim. Now, it goes through the next, and then skip down. Here comes Yoshua now. By the way, take a look back for 1 second. Take a look back for 1 second, why Yosef is associated here at all. Take a look back in Parsha. There's a very important concept I want to introduce here. Take a look back in on page 230 in Parshas Miketz. Pasuk 234, page 234. A very important concept I want to introduce here. This is where Yosef has become the viceroy of Egypt, and eventually there's a famine in the land of Israel, and then Yaakov Avinu sends down the brothers to go get food in Egypt. So they come into Egypt, and they're standing in front of Yosef. Now pick it up on page 234, top line. Vayizkar Yosef es hachalomos asher cholam lahem. Yosef remembers the dream. Vayomer alehem. What's the first thing out of his mouth when Yosef sees his brothers now after all these years? Miraglim atem. You are spies. Liros says servos ars, but you've come to see the vulnerability of the land. Yosef accuses the brother of being miraglim. Now you notice that here they're called later on. It's going to say they went the ragel. To be a miragel has got a negative connotation. Moshe Rabbeinu said v'yasuru. Moshe Rabbeinu said, look, come back and bring the positive of the land. To be a miragel means you're looking, even somebody who speaks Lashon Hara is called rechilus. He's a miragel. He goes around from place to place, walking around, spreading negative reports. Yosef accused them of being miraglim. That negativity is then associated with the guy from Menashe. And not only that, it has an effect on all of them. So there's a concept the Gemara says, La'olam al yiftach adam piv l'satan. Never open your mouth and invite the Satan in. And what that means is, if you're ever giving an example, and it's a positive example, I want to give an example of somebody getting rich. So I say, if one day I would make $7 million, that's a good way to give an example. If one day I would suddenly come across a Mercedes, that's a good example. If you're ever giving a negative example, you never use yourself and you never use other people. Person should never say about himself, if he's giving an example, sometimes the person is talking says, well, let's say he would die. If somebody talks to another person, well, let's say you die suddenly. You never say something like that to another person. Certainly don't say it about yourself. Because al tiftach pel satan. Don't give the Satan an opening, a chance to carry out what you're saying. What that means is that the words have some sort of powerful effect. The words have an effect. Yosef saying, we talk about a long time before this, years before this, Yosef said, Miraglim atem, you're spies. You know how long you're talking about? They were 210 years in Egypt. You're talking about 300 years earlier about. Miraglim atem, you're spies. That somehow activates a negative energy, which is now going to be manifest years later. And therefore, Yosef is associated with his member of his tribe, who himself is going to bring back a negative report. Okay. Then is one of the questions that everybody asks over here. On 6 lines from the bottom. Elish Mosa Shalach Moshe Lasuras. These are the names of the men who Moshe sent to check out the land. Vayikra Moshe leHoshea binun Yehoshua. Moshe pronounces Hoshea binun, he calls him Yehoshua. Okay, now take a look at Rashi. It's the left column, second line from the top on page 798. Vayikra Moshe leHoshea, says Rashi, Nispalel olav, he davened on him, Ka Yoshiacha me'atzas meraglim. Hashem should save you from the plot of the spies. Now that begs a question, which is obviously that what? Moshe seems to have known there was going to be trouble. The answer is, the Mefarshim would say he didn't know there was going to be trouble. But he sensed there could be trouble. And since there could be trouble, he says a tefillah for his Talmud Yoshua, which begs another question. That means he felt that they were all good guys. He felt that there's a certain vulnerability in Yoshua. That there's a vulnerability. What's the vulnerability that Yoshua carries that the other ones don't necessarily carry? So one answer is, Moshe Rabbeinu knows that Yoshua is his prime disciple. And as a disciple, you've studied not only the Torah of the Rebbe, you've studied the behavior of the Rebbe. That's what a real disciple is. A real disciple is that even the mannerisms are like the Rebbe. I've met guys who have Rebbes who are very close to their teacher, their main Torah teacher, and they even talk with the same mannerisms, the same nuances, everything. What was Moshe Rabbeinu last week's Parsha? What was Moshe Rabbeinu's most outstanding characteristic? Humility. So obviously Yoshua is a humble person too. Oh, when you're a humble person, if there's like a group pressure and the group is moving in a certain direction, even if you don't necessarily feel that way, your humility may cause you to give in to their opinion and to their view. And if their view is that we shouldn't go into the land of Israel, so maybe Yoshua is going to bend because of his humility, number one. Number two, Moshe had a different concern. There are two types of Yetzer Haras. When Yaakov Avinu was wrestling with the angel, famous fight, Yaakov and the angel, the big wrestling match, what did that angel look like? How do you picture this guy? How do you picture the angel? What do you picture? Yaakov wrestled with an angel. You must have an image. The Torah calls him a man. We only know that he's the archangel of Esav. How do you picture him? How do you picture Esav? How do you picture these people? I must have an image in your mind, right? Big strong guy, like muscle, kind of with brass knuckles, and I always like that concept. By the way, I was intrigued by the idea of brass knuckles. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I never used one, but it's pretty cool. You put them on, and he nails. Yeah, and he's probably a big muscled guy with no shirt, big tattoo, probably a headband of some sort. Looks like a motorcycle gang member. So the Gemara says there are two opinions what he looked like. The guy wrestling with Yaakov Avinu. One is that he looked like an outlaw, exactly that. Look like. The other is he looked like a Talmid Chacham. Picture a Talmid Chacham. He looked like Rav Samet, right? Wrestling with Yaakov Avinu. Right? He looked like Rav Elyashiv, he looked like Rav Moshe Feinstein, wrestling with Yaakov. What does that mean? What does that mean? He's wrestling with Yaakov Avinu. That means that the archangel of Esav is obviously the Satan. The Satan is the Yetzer Hara, is the angel of death. Do you know that he's all one? The Satan, the Yetzer Hara, the angel of death, he wears different hats at different times. There are two temptations for a Jew, two ways we stumble. One is where we see blatantly in front of us, it's an Aveira. I know it's an Aveira, and it looks like non-kosher pizza, smells like non-kosher pizza. Hey, it even tastes like non-kosher pizza. That is, I've given in to I know what it shouldn't be doing, and I'm going to do it anyway. There's a second type, which is more subtle, where he actually convinces us that what we're doing is a mitzvah. That's very dangerous. Where he convinces you to walk across the Beis Medrash and adjust the tefillin of the new guy in Ohr Somayach, the tefillin patrol. I don't know if you've been in the Beis Medrash or the mitzvah patrol, right? Where he convinces you it's a mitzvah. Where the guy whose wife needs help in the house, yet he runs out of the house to go help out in the shul because they're straighten out the benches in the shul because it's a mitzvah on Erev Shabbos, an hour before Shabbos, where his wife is desperately in need of him at home. So you should be staying in the house, but the Yetzer Hara convinces you that that's a mitzvah. That's the sort of thing. It's a very subtle Yetzer Hara. Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's why the Yetzer Hara fighting with Yaakov Avinu looks like one of two things. He either looks like a thug, where you know that it's an Aveira, or he looks like a Talmid Chacham. He's convinced you that this is something, that it's a good thing to do. Yoshua, what's Moshe Rabbeinu worried about? Moshe Rabbeinu is worried that Yoshua may convince himself that it's a mitzvah to not go into the land of Israel. And therefore he'll bring back a negative. Why would Yoshua feel it's not a mitzvah not to go to the land of Israel? Remember last week's Parsha? Eldad and Medad, remember they were prophesizing? What was their prophecy? What did they say? That Moshe's going to die and Yeshua's going to take the Jewish people into the land. And what was Yeshua's reaction? Tell him, stop him. I don't want to hear that. And Moshe Rabbeinu knows that that's how Yeshua feels. So what's Yeshua going to do? Well, now he'll be one of the spies. He'll go into the land of Israel, and now he's got an opportunity to keep the Rebbe alive. And they'll make a mitzvah out of it. How? How will he keep the Rebbe alive? By bringing a negative report. about Eretz Yisrael. And therefore Moshe says a tefillah, Kol Yoshiachim. He's like, Yoshua is vulnerable on these grounds. I know what Yoshua wants. He wants to keep me alive. He's going to make a mitzvah out of it. Gewaldig pshat, right? He's going to make it. Moshe Rabbeinu has to daven for Yoshua. Finally, there's a Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch takes it on the surface level. And he says it wasn't underlying it as a show. Rav Hirsch says, Moshe Rabbeinu said this publicly. That means he's getting ready to send these guys, and he makes an announcement. Hoshea, I'm making your name Yehoshua. Why would he do that at this point here? So according to Rav Hirsch, he's making a public announcement. Hoshea means the one who has delivered you in the past. If you add a yud to it, it becomes a future tense. Yehoshua, the same God that has delivered us in the past, he will deliver us when we go into the land of Israel. It's a public announcement, and it's encouraging all the Meraglim. You got nothing to worry about. It's going to work out. Hoshea is the past, Yehoshua is the future. And that's very, very apropos for what we're going through right now. Right? It's very apropos. And it's always been Hoshea, Hashem is taking care of us in the past. Yehoshua, he's going to take care of us in the future. We just have to stay focused and make sure we daven, learn, behave, be good, and Mirz Hashem will have the Yeshua. Okay.